curious if I can jump in, because you had talked about consulting couples, like especially before they get married. What do you think are some of the like biggest red flags about how couples deal with money that you would want to espouse your knowledge on?
So I encourage people, when you get serious in dating, whatever that means to you, like everybody's got different measures of what that is. You do the credit report date. I show you mine, you show me yours. I don't care about how much money you have. It tells a story about how you spend your money. You get somebody that's a no debt person, somebody that's a heavy debt person, we got a problem. You got somebody that wants to save for financial independence and somebody that really wants to spend, we might have a problem. We often get, the nerd and the free spirit. We get different personalities. That's one thing. But can we all point towards the same goal? If my number one goal is the fire and I want to retire, at 40, and the other person's like, no, we should buy that Ferrari and have fun, we're going to have a problem. And what happens is I want people to have that discussion when you get serious rather than when you're engaged or married.
Welcome to the Childfree Wealth Podcast, hosted by Bree and Dr. J, certified financial planner. Here we discuss life and finances as it relates to being child-free. This podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Please consult your advisor before implementing any ideas heard on this podcast. Hey everyone, on our journey to 100 episodes, today we are sharing an episode from the DINKY Pod that we all know and love. This originally aired last year, and Dr. J went on there, talked with Kristen and Erika. If you had not heard it before or want to hear it again, take a listen, and you're going to hear a fun and exciting conversation.
Dr. J is extensively qualified as a certified financial planner who has both a PhD and an MBA, as well as being the author of his book, Portraits of Child-Free Wealth. Well, hi, Dr. J. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're super pumped to talk to you about this topic.
You had nothing better to do on a morning than to talk about finances?
It's 8 a.m. on a Tuesday where we are.
Hey, if that's you, get up in the morning like, yay, I want to talk finances. I'm game.
Woohoo!
All right. Well, I love that. Let's waste no time on that topic. Actually, since we live in different places, I'll just point out you do live in Mississippi. And for our listeners who are not based in the United States, Mississippi is, considered part of the Deep South, where people would typically lean conservative and kind of espouse traditional values. So our first question for you, Dr. J, I would love to know, what is it like being child-free in Mississippi specifically? And has it been difficult to find a child-free community where you are?
There is no child-free community. Like, when you say, hey, you want to find one, like...
You are the community.
It's me and my wife. That's it.
Wow.
No, I'm sure there are like three of us out here. But like, my wife and I, we embraced something called Garden of the Rose, where one's growing, one's providing support. And for my wife, she found a great job here in Mississippi. We moved 1,200 miles here to Mississippi. And then that was like 6 months or 8 months before the Roe overturn, which changed everything. Our governor came out publicly and said, well, I'm not tapping your phones or reading your mail, but... I'm like, well, but what? And we're not currently working on outlawing contraception. Currently. So that means it's on the schedule somewhere. Let's just say in hindsight, running a child-free financial planning firm in Mississippi, not the best location. I actually had to do a whole bunch of work with compliance people and all that to move my company to being under SEC just to protect the privacy of my clients. And, you wouldn't think of those things, but hey, if the governor's willing to say he's not tapping your phones, well then... you got to go out of your way to protect you and your clients. I'll tell you, I talk to people in much more blue states, and Mississippi is deep south. And for those that don't know, this is where the Dobbs case came from. And, the overturn of Roe started here. It is an interesting world. Let's just put it that way.
So you guys are going to move back after the job situation or TBD?
Let's just say that's one of those debates. The debate is, do you stay and fight, or do you go somewhere where your values are respected? By the way, I don't know if there's a right answer, because if everybody moves out and nobody takes a good fight, well, then nothing will ever change. My wife and I have had that debate a lot, and it's still TBD on kind of long term, but like my wife works in public health. Mississippi needs the public health help, but do you want to stay and fight? I'm not saying right or wrong. You got to pick. Do you want to wake up in the morning and have to fight?
Yeah.
Right.
This is a common debate Kristen and I have about staying in America or leaving America.
Okay, wait a minute. That is not the same as staying in Mississippi or leaving Mississippi, okay? I mean,
No, I mean the stay and fight or the like leave and find a place that, more reflects your values.
I'm kind of done. I'm done with this place. I'm good. I'm going to move somewhere where there's no guns, where there's no shootings, like things like that. So, but it is a much smaller capacity than the fight in the deep south. That is a whole other world.
Yeah, right.
yep. So I had somebody email me the other day and said, okay, how do we find a child-free, liberal-leaning world, low cost of living, good safety, and good health care? My answer is you don't. We actually did a deep dive into other countries because a lot of child-free folks are, looking at other countries and different things. The combination of safety, low cost of living, and good health care doesn't really exist. I can get you everything else if you want to go high cost of living, or you have to give up on something. And I don't know what the right answer is. I mean, I'll be real. Living in Mississippi is really cheap, but that's because nobody wants to live here.
And I heard you say that you're 30 minutes from a grocery store, you're nowhere near DoorDash country, you don't get delivery, so you are living off the grid a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I tell people I have no delivery. They're like, what do you mean? You have to use DoorDash? I'm like, no, nothing. Amazon takes an extra 2 days to get here.
Oh, wow. I didn't even consider that. Well, from your podcast, we've heard you say that child-free folks have less debt than parents, but aren't significantly wealthier. You quoted only 5% net wealth more than their parents. Given that child-free folks are saving literally hundreds of thousands on raising a child, why do you think that is?
Okay, I'm going to turn this around on you guys, and I probably should have warned you in advance. I do this. Do you two care about how much money you have when you die to pass on to the next generation?
No.
Cool. Then that changes your entire financial plan.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
So if your goal is not to pass on money, if you're going to die with zero, this book I recommend called Die with Zero, net worth is not a goal. I believe, and I don't have 100% data, but this is what I do. Net worth of child-free folks, actually, interestingly enough, the highest net worth over 55 in the U.S. is single child-free women, or childless technically in the census language, but it's not by much. But I think that's because we have different set of goals. So if you don't care about passing on money, some point in life, you're actually earning money to go towards your estate you don't care about. The way I say it is my nephews get whatever's left over. If they get 10 grand, 100 grand, fine. If they get $1 million, I screwed up. I should have either given away that money or spent it.
Yeah, that's a great point. Sorry to my nieces and nephew.
Well, no, I mean, realistically, so we have a college fund for our nephews that's set aside, but they need that when they go to college. They don't need it when I'm 80 and die. If you're leaving all your money to the end, you're making the wrong choices, both for you and the family.
Yeah. Oh, I love that you have a college fund for your nephews. That's so cute.
Well, we started it because rather than giving a whole bunch of Christmas gifts and toys that are useless, we're like, yeah, we'll give you one thing, and then the rest goes into the college fund. I think the better one I heard, I was working with somebody who wants to do a fund for their nieces and nephews. By the way, technical term, nieces and nephews together is nibblings. It's like siblings, except nieces and nephews.
I love that. Yeah, no, we need one that's plural. That's great.
They're going to set up a fund for their nibblings in order to be able to go do a study abroad program or start their life or buy a car. So just afford an opportunity they otherwise wouldn't. And just putting that aside. And I'm like, that's a nice idea.
Yeah, I love that because when I studied abroad, I was so poor. I worked at the Rocky Mountain Chocolate Factory in Orange County, California for months to save scrounge money. So that's a good use case. I like that a lot. Okay. So, and also, by the way, I think I should just call out, I'm really glad you mentioned that data point about childless single women being having the highest net worth, because I was going to talk to you about that too. I just think that's fascinating. And especially on our podcast and in our social media, we see a lot from men who are well, we take care of the women, we support the women. And I'm like, where's this data point coming from? I'm pretty sure we've seen time and time again that women have more money, they're more educated, they have higher rates of employment. So anyway, I just think it's very interesting that childless women are actually indeed richer than men. So take that, men.
I mean, let's be real. The child-free and childless communities online are 80% women or better. Okay, so that's just all the data anyone I've ever seen. When I look at my clients, I had one single male as a client for a time, but that's it. Every other's been a couple or a single woman, and usually it's the woman who reaches out from the couple, which is kind of an interesting data point because there's a lot of research about making finance accessible to everybody and some of the barriers. There's real data behind that of saying, yeah, people are afraid to reach out, but one of the more interesting things from a financial standpoint is helping, we call them soloists or solo agers, where no kids, no partner, and all of a sudden they got to do it all themselves. A recent study come out from Fidelity found that the single tax is somewhere between about $400,000 and $1 million across your lifetime for being single. Because like you rent a one-room apartment, if you have somebody split it, that's half the cost. If you're single, you have no other choice. So it's really been nice to see a whole lot of women saying, yep, I want to control my finances. I want to do it. And they're kicking butt. I mean, they are just doing awesome.
Oh, that's awesome. I love to hear that. All right. You mentioned on your podcast that you've seen like the tale as old as time, successful strategy for financial independence is defined as no longer needing to work, has been max out your retirement accounts, pay off your debts, and stay out of debts. Of the mistakes you do see when it comes to basic financial planning, what are some of the most common ones to avoid?
Yeah, and I would probably invert that list. The first is get out of debt and stay out. I think that's probably the biggest financial one. And I have this debate with people all the time. Should I invest or should I get out of debt? You get out of debt because credit cards are now 20 or 30% interest. I mean, they're crazy. Same with student loans and all the other fun stuff. I think what happens is we all get overwhelmed and put our head in the sand a little bit on finances. You know, I joke that I talk about two taboo topics at once, child-free and finances. And people are like, I don't want to talk about either of those. I'm like, well, let's talk about both, you know? And I don't know why, but when I was doing research for my book, I found that people would rather talk about their sex life than their finances. Well, think about it. Go to your friends and have a conversation about your finances. Talk about how much debt you're in. They're going to shut down immediately. If you go and talk about your sex life, you might get some, people that feel a little off, but have a conversation.
Yeah, it's so weird because it's like you would think that both would be, taboo, right, socially. But yeah, I'd rather talk about finances personally.
And you'd be in the minority there. And I think what happens is people get overwhelmed and they go, well, I wasn't taught finances. Well, neither was I. The only thing I was taught in high school was how to balance a checkbook, which is a waste of time. Now they go, well, but I'll never, and they fill in the blank. I'll never be a millionaire. I'll never be out of debt. No, you just have to choose if you're going to do it. Now, housing costs in the U.S. are crazy. Incomes are still down. There's a whole bunch of systematic things that need to get there. But your money behaviors are going to determine more of your success. And people are like, well, I can't get out of debt. Well, no, you can't. You got to get out of budget. It's going to be hard. It's going to suck. It's much easier to get it in debt than out. But once you're out, you can do whatever you want with it.
So would you say like a lot of it is just debt for people who are trying to plan? They just don't know how to get out of debt or they get themselves into debt too easily?
There's been a lot of marketing about debt, talk about good versus bad debt and just the consumerism that goes along with that. And I'm going, okay, cool. Do you want to buy that? Amazon's my problem. I have a problem area with Amazon. I spend too much money on it. But do you want to buy that item on Amazon or do you want to do the trip? People are like, oh, I want to do the trip. Well, then that's a different change of behavior. A lot of us do retail therapy, mindless spending. Cool. If you have a budget for it and you stay in your budget and you're not going in debt, I don't care how you spend your money. But is your money going towards your goals? And that's the thing. I think the other thing I find is that people allow finances to control their life too much. So when I look at financial planning, my thing is to first figure out what life you want to live, second, figure out your finances, and third, figure out your taxes. People go, oh, well, can I retire? And I go, well, do you want to retire? They say, no. Well, then why are we talking about retirement? It's just, we get stuck in this because we're child-free folks. We've thrown away the standard life plan. We have to make our own. And then people are like, well, where do I go? How do I do that? What do I want to be when I grow up? I don't know. Let's figure it out.
Right. It's a little bit of therapy and self-introspection, it sounds like, to kind of figure out how to plan.
Well, the way I say it is people need three people in their life. A therapist to look back, a spiritual person to look up, and a coach to look forward. Now, those are all broad terms, but you get the difference. Whichever one of those three you like, you need the other one. Because if you like looking back, you should look forward. I get people all, well, I'm like, cool. What do you want to do is a completely different question.
Right. Well, that actually brings me to my next question, because I'm really excited to talk to you about two common financial plans that you see for retirement among child-free communities. So the two major differences that you've mentioned in financial planning for those people are the lack of a need to pass on a legacy, like we just went through that mini exercise, and alternative approaches to retiring. So starting with number one, from your experience, do you know if most child-free people are passing on their money to biological family members, like such as nibblings or organizations and charities, or are they really, most of them just, dying with zero?
I have a lot of child-free folks reach out and go, well, what do I do with what's left over? Is a different question than I want to save it for a certain purpose. And when you look at it, there's some interesting data that says child-free folks are more generous as far as charities. And I see a lot of that in all different random charities, who knows what. But really, the point is to create a will and actually have beneficiaries so the state doesn't get confused. Because you die without a will, they go to your next of kin. If you don't have a next of kin, in some states, that means they take your money, which, by the way, that is not what you want. Yeah, people are aiming for a die with zero, but then they have to have like a name saying, I'm going to give it to this charity or whatever it is. And it doesn't matter where you want to give your money. I think the difference is it's not a priority. It's kind of like they get whatever's left over. It's not like, hey, I want to leave generational wealth. You see a lot of that online in the finfluencers routine of, starting generation. I'm like, that's just not a goal. So if that's not a goal, my question there is then, can you either stop working or change work or invest in yourself earlier in your life? Rather than working to add to your net worth you don't care about, how about you, I don't know, start that cupcake shop you've always wanted to do, or, run a podcast. I don't care, whatever it is, and follow your passion.
Well, that brings us to our next question. Perfect segue to talk about fire versus file. For those who don't know, there is a big movement I've seen, at least on Reddit. I've actually never talked to anybody in real life about this. But on the internet, there is a big movement that people are moving towards called FIRE, which is financial independence, retire early. So basically they just, and Dr. J, jump in if I'm paraphrasing this wrong, but basically they just like save as much as humanly possible. They live off of like ramen noodles. Their whole goal is to retire like absurdly young. So like 45, that kind of timeline. And so they kind of like kill themselves to get there in the short term. Whereas you've coined a term called FILE, which is financial independence, live early, where you get to basically retire as you go. Like you get to take breaks. You mentioned the gardener and the rose approach, where, one person stays at home and supports the other while they go live their lives and pursue their passions, and you kind of switch off. First of all, I just want to mention, I think this has changed my life. This concept has I've had several conversations with my husband about how do we file? Because that's what I want to do. I want to be able to work a couple years, take off a couple years, travel, do little passion projects, and then switch off and then let him go be the rose for a little bit. So I guess I'm just kind of asking overall, I guess what's the difference between these two fire versus file movements? How much are people gravitating towards one or the other? And then anything else you want to add just to kind of shed light on file?
If you read the financial literature, I'm a certified financial planner, you do a study for that. First of all, they never mention being child-free. It doesn't exist. So that's a separate issue. But there's only two options: retirement and pre-retirement. That's it. Your life is one of those two things. What I found is talking to child-free people, they're like, retirement's not really my goal. I want to cut back on work. I want to, go work at that nonprofit. I've had people, one of my favorite answers, I want to go work at the swim up bar, be the bartender, whatever it is. How do I take a lower salary and be okay with it, but enjoy my life? I had somebody I talked to that is a therapist, and she's like, look, I'll always have a couple clients. I'll work 1 day a week or 2 days a week just to keep my skills and keep myself sharp. And that's the kind of reoccurring theme, which is the difference between, hey, I'm just going to save all my money, retire, and, watch TV for the rest of my life. The years of working 25 years, retiring, get the watch, and just going into the pasture is gone. Most people, in the younger generations go, retirement's not even really a financial option. I'll disagree with that. It's possible. You just have to make it a goal. And you're right. Some of the fire people are making their own soap and eating ramen noodles, and that is an option. And they're sacrificing everything now to get out. But here's the thing. They get stuck because they know what they want to retire from, but not what they want to retire to. Okay, so you retire at 45, then what? So I had somebody from my book. He retired in his early 40s. I was bored. Now what? He had done well financially, not a big deal. Came back and he's living what I call the file lifestyle. That's that dimmer switch for work of the right amount. He runs a marketing company. He only works 25 hours a week, never before 10 and never on Fridays. That's a nice balance. And it's just enough to enjoy it. But I think the hard part there is we're programmed to follow the standard life plan. Standard life plan says you get married, you have kids, you save for retirement, you're retired. So we've gone off that script. So you're talking about you and your husband. When you talk about Gardener and the Rose, part of that's built in is when you have a couple, it's really hard for both to grow at the same time because the systems are just not made that way. Somebody needs to literally do the gardening and, pay the bills, and somebody needs to grow. But by having a defined swap. So my wife and I are about 10 to 15 years out from our swap. It's okay then for the rows to be a little selfish because they need to be, and for the gardener to provide support. Although what I find is that the people that need to grow often don't want to do that because this is dynamic where the gardener will know the rose needs to do this and they've needed to do it for a couple of years. But then the rose yeah, but I'm not sure I can do it. It's that selfishness that, can I really just focus on me? Can I really focus on my growth? Yes. And guess what? If you do something and it fails, try something different. That's the difference with the child-free folks. We can do that. I see a lot more people starting their own business, going back to school for other things. People go, well, I went to school for this. I'm going, that's nice. That was a decision you made when you were 18. You in your 40s is a completely different person. So why are we still doing the career we signed up for when we were 18? And I'll even have this discussion with people well, but I make $100,000. $100,000 for some reason. 6 figures is a big number for people. I go, cool. So what you just told me is $100,000 is worth you being miserable. And they're like, well, no, I didn't say that, but if I cut back on my salary, I'm not going to be able to retire early. So what you're saying is you want to be miserable for the next 10 years. Well, no, I didn't say that. And there's this big thing because they're letting finances run it. So what jumped out for you on the file lifestyle?
Oh my God, everything. So I did see a TikTok. This is how I get my source of news.
We'll have a separate discussion about taking your finances off of TikTok.
Well, I saw one I think it was right in the middle of the pandemic, 2020, where somebody did coin a term of retiring as you go. And that was literally what she was saying. She said, somebody I knew, she was in her 20s. She's one of my best friends died. And I was like, what the hell am I doing? I'm in a career where I'm not happy. I'm slaving away and we're all supposed to retire 67, which sounds like hell because that's 40 years from now. How do I get enjoyment out of my life now? So she started doing this thing where she was 3 years on, 1 year off, but it sounded like a really novel idea. I was like, that's a really cool concept, but I really didn't think that was a realistic path. I was like, well, you need health insurance. And at the time I wasn't married. And there's all these well, what about this? And if that, and all these excuses that we make. So when I actually seen from a financial planner, no, you can do something like this. Actually, I'm encouraging people to do this. And especially now that I'm way more sure that I don't want kids, because that was another factor at the time, was oh, maybe I'll have kids. I feel my life has totally shifted. So it's I can literally do whatever I want. Why am I not taking advantage of this? So that's kind of what appeals to me, is just you're setting a path for making this okay for people like me who feel very scared about taking that leap.
Yeah. And I think part of why we're scared of taking the leap is because there is this standard life plan. And it's so ingrained in us. You have to buy a house. You have to retire. No, you don't. I have this debate all the time about renting versus buying. If you're child-free and you're nomad, you should not buy a house. And people are well, but you have to. Says who? Says somebody on TikTok, I guess. But what happens is we're on the DINKY Podcast. Most DINK couples, if you do it right and if you pay off your debt, you can live off one salary. That means one person can grow and one person can pay the bills. So if that means you guys want to go back to school, you want to try something different, you want to take a lower paying career, why not? Now, the other approach you're talking about is actually what they call a phased retirement, where it takes sabbaticals. Cool. That works too, whatever you want. The difference between file and fire is if your goal is to retire, your finances are different than if your goal is to find a balance. It's kind of where you're shooting. And what I tend to recommend, and sounds like you're about ready for this, is taking a sabbatical. Taking 6 months off to find out what do you want to be when you grow up. It has nothing to do with age, just kind of it's just a generic thing. And the way I like to do sabbaticals, the first 2 months, you watch Netflix. I'm not exaggerating. I'm literally, I want you to do mindless stuff because we've all been on the treadmill for so long, or the dribble wheel, and we're just always in this work mindset that we kind of just need a brain decompressing. The second 2 months is try something. I don't know. What do I want to do? Let me figure it out. And you kind of work through ideas and I do this or I do that. And then the last 2 months, go intern or go work for some place and go if you want to open a cupcake shop, go work in a bakery for a couple weeks. See if you like it. I had somebody who had a really good job working for the state, did well, kind of debating this routine, the file, the DINK life, decided to take sabbatical. It happened to be during November, which is NaNoWriMo. For anyone that hasn't followed that, is when you write a novel in a month. She got most of it done at that point. She's now working on publishing that novel and a career as a writer. Now, by the way, career as a writer, you either make a lot of money or no money. There's nowhere in between, but so much happier. That's the difference. I'm trying to get people to Marie Kondo their life. Get rid of the things that don't bring them joy and focus on the stuff that does. And be well, but my finances say. And this is where I'll have the discussion with them. Okay, listen, I got a PhD, an MBA, and a CFP. I'm looking at your finances. You're fine. And then they'll fight me for a little bit more. And I'm like, okay, you're paying me to give you this judgment and it's fine. What do you want to do with your life? And they're like, oh. And then the analysis paralysis sits in and like, because I've taken away all their excuses and they're like, oh, well, let me try something. And that's important. I think the other part of it is you two are probably, you got a few more years on this. We get to the child-free midlife crisis. You hit your personal, professional, financial goals, and then what? The standard life plan says you pass your goals on to your kids. We don't have that. And I'm like, cool. So now you're out of the rent and ramen station. You're paying your bills. You're good. You got out of debt. Cool. You've gone to school. You've gone to your career. Now you got 40 years left of your life. Now what? Now we get into like, what's the impact you want to make and where you want to go? And, what do you want your life to look like? There's no books on that. I'm working on one, but like, they don't exist out there of what's the manual for what happens when you run out of script.
Totally. I mean, just hearing you talk about this, like, it is making me think, like, I feel like, Kristen and I talk about this a lot. We've worked so hard to be okay with our decision to not have kids. And then this conversation feels like it's having to reach that peak over and over again of like, it's okay to want what you want. Now, how do we just find the permission structures to support what you want so that you can live that life? But it's just, like you said, like it is like so much therapy over and over again of like, I'm allowed to do this. I'm allowed to have what I want. Now, how do I move forward with that reality?
So let me give you the therapy tool. Not really a therapy tool because I'm not a therapist, but let's kind of see it went that way. So 2 things. One is an awareness of getting dragged back to the standard life plan. Because what happens is as soon as you said, hey, I'm child free or childless, and you've gone off the plan, people get dragged back. First one I see, people are like, I got to buy a house. Well, that's the standard plan. I got to retire. That's part of the standard plan. I got to do this career. That's all part of the standard plan. So an awareness of the plan is important. The second is to look at what decisions you're making, what you're telling yourself, and ask the question of whose voice am I hearing in my head? Unfortunately, it's usually not ours. It is usually culture, religion, parents, family, friends saying, I must. I get people all the time, I'm worried I'm behind. And I'm like, behind who? You set your goals, you set your life. They're like, well, by 40, I'm supposed to have done this. I'm like, well, first of all, anything you read online or TikTok says you got to do this by 40 or assumes you have kids. So all of that doesn't fit you. The second of all, if you're happy and you're moving towards your goals, it doesn't matter how much money you have. As long as you're happy. People are like, oh, well, but I need to, blah, blah. You don't need to do anything. And I go, well, who's saying you have to do that? And I get like some of the weirdest answers. Usually church or parents are the first answer. Then it's like, oh, my, 4th grade teacher taught me something. Or like these random things come out of the middle of nowhere. And I'm like, you have to have an awareness of that so that you can pick a different life. But what happens is I don't think about it as permission so much as bridging the gap between what you say you want to do and what you're actually doing. I love icebreaker. I always ask people, if you could do any job in the world, got paid as much as you needed, what would you do? And everybody has different answers. My answer would be, I'd be a boat captain, like below deck, Captain Lee, driving the boats. And then I go, well, then why aren't you doing that? And they go, well, I went to school for this or that. And I'm like, those are all excuses. And they're like, well, but I can't give up what I just put 20 years into. Yeah, you can, because it's your life. You get to do what you want. And sometimes I'll even have to do how old are you? And they go, 35. And go, cool, you're over 18, you're an adult, you can do whatever you want. But we have this stuff in our head that's just, head trash that we got to get past.
Okay, so I know we've jumped around a little bit and we've covered quite a few topics, and I want to dive a little bit deeper. So particularly the garden the rose concept, do you encourage couples to save up to a certain amount before one of them goes, or how do you know if you're ready to quit your job and let your partner be the gardener?
So the old school way of used to call financial independence FU money, where you had enough money to tell your job what to do with it. That was the old, for most people, I say, okay, if you're out of debt and you can pay your bills, you can make a change. That might take a little bit of time to get out of debt. And they go, well, but I might need to buy a new car. Okay, you might in the future, but what's important? And also I find that people get stuck because of what they've already decided. So great example, I've had a lot of discussions with people about downsizing their house. You could live somewhere, pay half the price, maybe in a different area. That's kind of what we started talking about. But hey, half the price, and then you can go follow your passion and do the garden and the rose. People are like, yeah, but my house right now is so nice. I'm like, cool. So what you're saying is that house is enough that you don't want to go follow your passion. They go, no. Well, so what happens is many couples can embrace the garden and the rose if they're willing to make changes, which includes getting out of debt and, but what usually happens is I'll ask the gardener, hey, are you willing to change your house, sell your house, whatever your change is in your life for the rose? They'll say, absolutely. And then I'll ask the rose, are you willing to make that change for yourself? No. There's all these stories we're telling in our head. So we have to work that through. And I tend to find, so I work with clients, I meet with them monthly. Kind of the first 2-3 months is figuring out kind of what life do you want to live. Then the second 2 or 3 months is figuring out the finances to get there. It's not like a hard and fast, you need this amount of money, you need to do this, because it depends on what life you want to live. I've had people where, they've downsized their lifestyle completely to have a better life, following, I get a lot of people following art passions, which frankly, art doesn't pay a lot, but passion, and they're happier living in a house worth a quarter of what it was, or renting, or whatever it is, whatever life change they had to do to get there. The hard part is with most couples is you kind of need a third person to referee that, to kind of like bounce things off of, because we as couples are not great at hearing each other. I'll say the same thing the couple's been saying themselves forever, but it's just through a third person. And the fun one of the couples be like, oh, well, it's his turn or her turn or whatever it is. Everybody's going to get, called out. And they go, okay. And then I stir around their brain and I'm like, well, do you want a better life? They go, yes. Well, then here's how you got to do it. I'm not really teaching them anything new. I'm just holding up a mirror and rephrasing what they already believe. How long have you and your husband needed to change?
Well, this kind of bleeds into one of the other questions I have, which is my husband's getting his PhD. And I know you and your wife both have PhDs. So like we've been joking in our house that he's the rose right now, which I don't really see it like that. Like I'm more financially supportive right now, but I don't see it as like he gets to like pursue his passion. I see it as him like going through necessary schooling. Like we're both kind of gardeners right now.
So let me challenge you here. You are being the gardener. He is in the rose, which is a growth phase. But what you did is you justified it. The difference is with the garden and the rose, intentionally, you have a discussion about the roles you're doing and taking turns. People say, well, can I be like 75% the rose and 25% the gardener? Well, if you're going to a PhD program or whatever schooling, that takes up most of your life. Some things are going to slip. You need somebody there to support you. And if you're soloist, you need to pay somebody to support you, like literally doing the gardening or cleaning the house or whatever. It doesn't have to be physically. But here's the thing. You've been in those roles without having the discussion. And then if we don't have a plan to switch, we can get some resentment that builds in there. When's my turn to grow? The other part of it is by having clear roles, he might be more willing to take chances and grow, which will help him, which then helps you. And you end up it's like a ladder. You're building on each other to a happier and happier life.
Yeah, I mean, this is no reflection of my relationship with my husband, but do you ever build this into prenups? Because what happens if you're the friggin' gardener for 5 years and then you're like, it's my turn to be the rose, and then they peace out and you're like, oh my God, I've just financially supported you for 5 years and now I'm being left in the dark. Do you encounter those kind of situations?
This is where I get people to say, well, we're going to keep separate finances because then if something happens, I'm okay. And with couples, we have 3 choices. We can all be on the same plan. We can all be on our own. So we have our own, or we have a mix. We each have our own and we have one together. People talk about combining accounts. It's not what matters. The question is we're all on the same plan. Here's the thing. Yeah, I'm okay. I'm good with prenups, especially if there's a big difference in income or other things. But the question is, are we all working towards the same goal? And if the prenup says, nope, we're doing it separately, we have to keep everything separate. And to keep a prenup, we need to keep finances separate. There's some other work that goes along with that. Now, if you can't trust your partner enough that you're going to get your turn as the rose, we got a problem. I love working with couples, and I prefer, if at all possible, to work with them before they get married and talk through their money values and their money good, bad, and uglies. And everybody should have a date where they review each other's credit reports. But what happens is, I'll be honest, I cannot save all couples. I've had some few that I'm going through the process. I'm like, it ain't going to work. And they're like, well, we're getting married in October. And I'm like, you can, but this is going to be an issue. You need to fix this or whatever else it is. And what happens is the number 1 cause of divorce in the U.S. is infidelity. Number 2 is money and money troubles.
I feel like I've always heard that money was number 1.
Well, people still cheat.
Yeah.
We could also have a discussion about financial infidelity as a separate discussion. But what's happening is either we're all working together or we're not. If you need a prenup to protect yourself, then we're not all working together. And that's okay. But pick one. You going to make your husband get a post-nup now? And
We do have a post-nup. I mean, I told him week 1 of dating, I said, I have a house. I have my finances set up. I've been kind of what you were saying earlier. I was the single woman who was trying to prepare for retirement, and I felt good about my finances. And I was like, anybody I marry should know going into it that I want to secure my own future, regardless of what happens in the relationship. So I encourage a postnup for everyone or a prenup, because I've also talked to lawyers who have said things like, kind of like what you were saying earlier, when you're with your will, is you can have a contract with the government that tells you who gets the money if you divorce, or you can have a contract between you and your partner about who gets the money if you divorce. And I'd rather have an agreement with my partner than than the government. So I highly recommend them.
And now the hard part is, and we could go a whole different set of path, is you need to maintain that post-nup, prenup all throughout. And especially like if you're living in like community property states like California, weird things happen with houses and other things that you need to be aware of as you're working it through. And I'm okay with that. As long as everybody knows the roles, it's clear, it's defined. Now, the reality check is, if your husband was having a rough time, you would support him, right? And you'd expect the same from him. That's where prenup, postnup gets a little weird. Because, you're out of a job for 6 months for no reason, no fault of your own. He's paying the mortgage now on your house. That's where we start getting troubles. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. It's just either we're all in this together or not. That's the hard part.
Curious if I can jump in, because you had talked about consulting couples, like especially before they get married. What do you think are some of the biggest red flags about how couples deal with money that you would want to espouse your knowledge on?
So I encourage people, when you get serious in dating, whatever that means to you, like everybody's got different measures for that is. You do the credit report date. I show you mine, you show me yours. I don't care about how much money you have. It tells a story about how you spend your money. You get somebody that's a no debt person, somebody that's a heavy debt person, we got a problem. You got somebody that wants to save for financial independence and somebody that really wants to spend, we might have a problem. We often get, the nerd and the free spirit. We get different personalities. That's one thing. But can we all point towards the same goal? If my number one goal is the fire and I want to retire, at 40, and the other person's like, no, we should buy that Ferrari and have fun, we're going to have a problem. And what happens is I want people to have that discussion when you get serious, rather than when you're engaged or married. But what happens is people go, oh, I don't know, but I don't want to talk about this. I've got, a lot of shame with money and other things. The other one I want people to talk about early on, is particularly in child-free folks, is what are we going to do for our parents? So what are the boundaries? So my boundaries, my wife and I have agreed to, nobody lives with us. I could probably live with my mother's been stable her whole life. She could probably live with me. I'd be okay. I'd kill my mother-in-law. So the rule is nobody lives with us because that's just fair for everybody. But you get people like, I'm going to support my family. I'm not, I don't know them. And now I'm making it up. But, one of you is putting money in to support the other person's family. There's a whole bunch of drama. Really what I want is the credit report and the other things to start the discussion. If you're in a couple and you can't talk about money, that's a problem. If you talk about it, you can work through it. Even if the answer is we're just going to keep everything separate, we're going to live like roommates. That's fine. But we talked about it and had that discussion.
Well, actually, that leads me to maybe one of our last questions, because I know we're getting close on time here. We often not just worry about retirement and long-term care for ourselves as child-free people, but we have to worry about our parents too. You mentioned something about long-term care policies being taken out on parents. I don't know anything about that. Could you tell us more about that?
Yeah, a couple things. We get this question, well, who's going to take care of when you're older? I hate that question. But I got kind of a love-hate thing because it gives me a chance to talk about finances. And yes, we all need a plan for long-term care. Right now, it costs about $108,000 a year to be in a skilled nursing facility. Now, by the way, some states are a lot more than that. That's average. And women will spend 3.7 years and men will spend 2.2 years. So you're talking about $500,000 in long-term care. When people go, well, the baby boomers are going to pass on money to the next generation. Nope. All that money is going to go to healthcare because chances are your parents don't have a plan around all that. So one of the things you need to think about is, are you going to support them? Now people go, well, we can do Medicaid. Medicaid only kicks in once you have no assets. And let's be frank, Medicaid healthcare sucks. I worked as a paramedic for years, and you knew the Medicaid facilities, you walk through them and your feet would stick to the ground. That disgusting. You're talking about four-door room and there are some nice facilities, but they're rare. And you're not going to get in because they're already booked. So you have to have a plan for this. One plan is you pay for your parents. Another plan is you pay for their long-term care insurance. Downside of long-term care insurance, older you get, more expensive it is. And if your parents, for example, their health impacts your costs and their parents would impact their costs, if they've had any dementia or Alzheimer's, the costs get just crazy expensive. If both your parents had dementia or Alzheimer's, you can't even get a quote on a policy. But you need to figure out what is your plan for your parents because it can have more of an impact on your financial plan than your decisions. Because all of a sudden, now my parents need care and it's $108,000 a year. Well, are you going to say, well, sorry, sucks to be you, which is fine. If that's your boundary, fine. But you better decide that way in advance and have a plan. I'll send you a link I have an article on how to care for elderly folks because they talk about the sandwich there. People take care of their kids and their parents at the same time. We're the open face sandwich. We're just taking care of our parents. And because we're child-free folks, you get you don't have kids, so you can take care of mom. There's like that expectation. And I'm like, no, that's not I wouldn't count on that 100%, but you need to work through what is your plan. And when we go back to couples, this is one of those discussions where I'm going to put all my money to care for your parents. And it gets kind of rough, let's call it that.
Right. That's a really good conversation that I don't think, I'm sure most couples have not had really in depth. Cool. Well, I would love to stay and chat. There's 6 other things I want to ask about, but for the sake of time, we could always invite you back for an episode at some point in the future. So thank you so much, Dr. J, for joining us today and answering all of our money questions.
Yeah, I'm sure we went a different direction you had planned, but the life and money intersection is what's really interesting.
Totally. Yeah, no, our questions are just guidelines. We like to just have conversations around them.
Free flowing.
Yeah.
If you enjoyed the show, please consider leaving a rating or review. We'd love to keep the conversation going. Please let us know your thoughts wherever comments are available or email us at media@childfreewealth.com. To stay up to date, find and follow Childfree Wealth on social media. If you're interested in working with us, learn more by visiting our website, childfreewealth.com. We'll see you next time.